So welcome back. For the past 3 classes, we've been learning and practicing concentration techniques and sort of including their relational impact, particularly our relationship with ourself. The first class focused on embodied practice, and the second class focused on perceptions, and last week we focused on emotions. So I wondered if there's anything you'd like to share about your experience practicing with any of these techniques so far, or any questions you have about any of them as we've been practicing them and exploring them together. So just raise your hand if there's something that you wanted to share with us or ask. Maria.
Hi. Yeah, I've been playing with some of the meditation techniques that you offered, and also how emotions and how our emotions are triggered and brought in. And for me, I think a great time for me to explore this is first thing in the morning when I wake up and I have this real peacefulness, and then the thoughts come in. And then really, but instead of like kind of doing my other stuff that I do to kind of, keep them at bay, I kind of let them in and just noticing the vibrations in my body and how it changes the state of my body as each thought creeps in, and how quickly I can get quite overwhelmed first thing in the morning if I kind of don't just stay with the bodily sensations, which and it's amazing how that first gap where everything's peaceful and then the thoughts come in and trigger the body into lots of different vibrations. So then I brought in like the meditation technique that you talked about, where the waves are all on the top and you float down. And it was so lovely to just do that, to just float under the waves and just not let go of everything, but it's just still all there. And just to be in that space underneath and really just feel the peacefulness of that. And then it's all been taken care of up above. I don't need to do anything. It's all on the waves crashing around, but I don't need to attend to that. I can just stay down here. And that was really nice to do that.
You're so right that we're, we awaken into this kind of spaciousness. There's just a moment there, and then the thoughts start rushing in and the feelings start rising, and there's so much to do today, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get everything done, and this person I have to talk to, and I'm not really sure how that's going to go, and we start right in right away. So it's good that you're able to return to the body and what the body is sensing.
And I noticed, because I was actively doing that, when you pay more attention to doing that, then you pay more attention to what you're doing in relationship with people. Like my mum can be quite angry and fast and manic, and it can be quite easy to get caught up in her vibrations, and I can feel it, and I feel myself giving myself that pause and just stopping and just giving it space so that I can respond differently. And I notice how calm I become the angrier my mum becomes, or if someone's really manic, like my niece was really kind of caught up in a lot of anxiety this week, and how I become really calm when if she gets really anxious, and then that kind of noticing her coming down into more of a calmness in response to the our limbic resonance is sort of becoming more equal.
And so it's different if you join her in her anxiety, or if you help her settle into your equanimity and ease. We are regulating each other all the time. So practice is what makes us intentional about whether we are going to join the person in their whatever their experience is, or if we're going to help provide a container for that experience, so that they can be self-regulating a little bit. Yeah, that's a really good observation. Yeah, the relational piece is so important. It's so important. Yeah, wonderful. That's a great observation, really. Anybody else? Anything you want to share? All right, well, dive in. Because today we want to bring together the practices of concentration in a more comprehensive way. So I'd like to begin with a practice that Joko taught that has been very helpful in my experience and for a lot of our students. It allows us to notice not only what's arising in our present moment experience, but the often overlooked patterns and systems that are created by our perceptions, thoughts, and feelings. So these patterns and systems form our conditioning and in turn are relating to ourselves, each other, and the world. So the way Joko has taught this, and she calls it labeling thoughts, but it's really labeling everything. First, on the cushion, we notice that the relationship is we're relating with ourselves in labeling what's arising in our experience, but then in relating with another person as the object of concentration, and then in relating with a group, family, work, community, and then in relating with the world. Now, all of these things can be brought to mind in meditation, and you can begin to label the associated thoughts, emotions, and so forth. So it's simply about bringing yourself or that person or that group or world to mind and focusing your awareness on it and establishing mindfulness of the thoughts and emotions, labeling them as you notice them. So this isn't there's a common practice where you just say thinking, sensing, or whatever. This is not that practice. Your labeling has to be quite specific as to what the actual thought or actual feeling is. So, so you might notice an emotion, feeling anger, then thinking, why is she so mean? Thinking, I should be more compassionate. Feeling hopeless about the situation. Feeling sad. Thinking, what can I do? So don't make any judgments about what's arising and disappearing. Just note it like an interested observer. So I thought we might, I think we might want to do a little bit of practice with this. Maybe I can do a little bit of guiding, and you can see what actually arises for you if we sit for just a little bit. And I'll guide this practice a little bit. Just cueing you when to shift your awareness from yourself to some other person, then to a group. Could be a group at work, it could be a family dynamic, and then the world. And all you're going to do is label the thoughts and the emotions arising and the sensations. And that's all you need to do. There's nothing complicated about this. So do you have any questions about it? Anybody have any questions about this? Yeah, Ellen. You're muted. So unmute yourself. Yeah.
So while we're sitting, you'll call out object or something like that, and then we imagine an object.
Yeah, just bring something to mind. I'll say, first, let's focus on yourself, awareness of your breathing, your body, and so forth. And we'll have a couple of minutes of just labeling what's arising in your body, your mind. It's just about the self. Then I'll just simply say, now bring someone else to mind. Could be anybody. Mm-hmm. It could be the postman. Could be grocery store clerk, whatever. Mm-hmm. And it could be someone you're having a difficulty with, or it could be someone that you care about deeply. It's not important for this exercise who it is. And then I'll say, now bring to mind a group. As I say, it could be, bridge group. It could be Sangha. It could be some other group you're part of, a work group or a family. And then the world. So we all have opinions and ideas and experiences of the world, right? So does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
We'll just do this for a couple of minutes, and then we'll see what you might have discovered. Everything that we do is an exploration, so it's discovery. So if you, for example, resist the practice, that's a discovery. Oh, I'm resisting the practice. It's not something bad or wrong about you. It's what you're discovering. So you discover what you discover. Could be something, could be nothing. We just keep an open mind in this kind of practice. So does that make sense? And so I'm gonna give you like a general cue, like focus on yourself. And then I'm going to allow some space for you to study and label. So be sure to label quite specifically, not just generally thinking. It's what is the actual language of the thought. So this is the only way that you can actually discover that there are systems and there are relationships among patterns among physical experience, emotions, and thinking. Okay, any other questions? Are you ready? All right, so I'm going to give you a couple of moments just to settle into some basic mindfulness, and then I'll ask you to direct your awareness. So that's all you're doing is this direct your awareness. So we have this big, wide, spacious awareness when we sit in mindfulness, and then we begin to focus it, and then noticing what's arising as we focus it on something. All right. All right. So let's just start by just a little bit of mindful practice, just coming into present moment experience. Now, as you're sitting quietly, breathing in and out, simply allow your awareness to rest on yourself and begin labeling whatever thoughts, feelings, or sensations arise in that awareness. Now turn your awareness towards someone else, brings someone to mind, and simply begin labeling thoughts, feelings, and any sensations you notice. Now bring your awareness to a group or gathering, something that you're connected with, and begin labeling the thoughts, feelings, sensations that arise in that awareness. Now expand your awareness to consider the world, your world. Begin labeling thoughts, feelings, sensations as they arise in that larger awareness. relax your awareness completely and bring it back into this body, in this place, in this moment. And we'll have a little bit of time to talk about what that experience was like for you or what you noticed. So, please raise your hand if you have anything you would like to share. Joel, and then Kim.
The most active part of the meditation for me was the group. I'm involved with a group and involved in a evolving argument with members of this group. And I was just watching the various currents of a little bit of appreciation for the Buddha nature of the people in the group, but then also a yearning to be right and to win the argument. and that was a wave that came again and again and again and again. And it was interesting to not have to be in the middle of that wave, but to watch it go by, as it were. That's it. That's what was most up for me.
Yeah. That's great. Kim, and then Ellen.
Yeah, labeling, but not having an opinion about it, or like this is good, this is bad. Like when I went to the big group, there was kind of chaos and people were talking at the same time, I'd imagined. And so I could say as a label, confusion, chaos, but I have an opinion about that too. It gives me a certain feeling. So
then you label that feeling.
As how would you label the feeling of chaos?
No, first you label you recognize that you've called up a group that has chaos at the center of it, and then you notice and label what your reactions to that are. You have an opinion about it. So
would I label it as opinion?
Yeah. Having a thought that this is uncomfortable, or having a thought that I wish this wasn't happening, or
I see.
Having a thought that I don't like this.
So it's kind of like the meta label.
Yeah, absolutely. You're labeling every single thing that comes up in your experience.
I see. So that becomes the new experience.
That becomes the new experience, right?
Okay. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah. So Ellen.
Like Joel, the most active one for me was group also. And the group that came to mind was my new Sangha. And at first it was simply, just a pretty lovely feeling of benevolence. And then I noticed disappointment and kind of sat with that for a little bit. And it was, I was making comparisons that are pointless, And so that's what I noticed.
Yeah. And so you label those comparisons. You have to be quite specific about it.
Well, it was comparison with what this group is like versus what Appamada is like.
Right. And so then you label all of those comparisons.
Oh my gosh. Well, I didn't go that deep into it.
That's why it's such an interesting practice, because you realize, after a while, you realize I'm only labeling the most crude thoughts and feelings. I'm not even labeling the fleeting ones that, are sort of going under the radar. Right?
Yeah.
And then as you practice with it a little bit more, you're capturing more of those. and the thoughts that get associated with those underlying emotions. Yeah. So that's why it's such a really profound practice, because as you continue to practice, you look at, and what are the thoughts I'm systematically not noticing, right? Yeah. So you start to become more aware of those. Yeah, it's good. It's really good. And you know, as we always say, comparing mind is the last to go. So yeah, we're constantly engaged in making comparisons, this thing against that thing, this person against that person, or what our expectations are, or whatever. We're always comparing something, and you're like, this isn't what I thought it would be.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, after a while of doing this practice, and I would say months or years even, you begin to see, oh, this feeling always leads to this kind of thought, and this kind of thought always leads to this kind of thought. And there's this kind of spiral that happens. And we always end up here, you know. So I always say, a bag lady on the street, you know, like however it begins, it always ends up there somehow. So we begin to see the patterns, and the patterns are something that we can interrupt. And especially when they're quite damaging or self-destructive or negative, then we have the capacity to say, oh, I know where that pattern goes. And that's not really a very helpful direction. Yeah, we can be a little bit more, I think of this as being the pilot of your experience rather than the hapless victim of it. You know, so yeah, that concept I had no idea about until I met Flint, that you could actually be the pilot of your experience. So, and be quite intentional about it. Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. Lori.
Yeah. You were talking about patterns at the last, and what I noticed that there was a lot of similarity between all the different things. So it's like, I mean, maybe it's just a mindset I'm in right now, that everything is kind of being filtered through the same.
Yeah, that's a good observation, actually.
Yeah, and then so I realized that the feeling sense, that's the one that it goes down to, this one particular feeling sense, and it's not a very positive one. You know, it's kind of a dis-ease.
Yeah,
so it's interesting.
Yeah, and then we have opinions about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my thoughts would run along the lines of, I'm an experienced meditator, I shouldn't be having these dissociated, dissatisfied feelings, or, you know, like, and then I'm off and running, right? I must not be doing this right. I can't be a very good meditator. There's a long time. I would think I would be better by now, you know, like maybe this doesn't work. Maybe it just doesn't work for me, it works for everybody else, you know. It's the prapancha of thinking, you know, that comes out of that.
Yeah.
All right.
But I like
John?
can I
go ahead.
I like that sense of what you said about the pilot of your experience. I think that's really important, particularly if you have consistent thoughts and they're going in the wrong direction, or maybe not in the right direction. Anyway.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. It's not enough to just say, this is who I am. That's just, I think, colluding with conditioning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We practice for a purpose, and that purpose is liberation. So when we're caught in our conditioning, we're free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Joan.
Well, you just touched on what I was asking. I was just wanting to hear more about our being able to be the pilot of our experience.
Yeah, well, we imagine that's what we're doing. We make a to-do list. We, you know, head ourselves into the day, determined to catch up our to-do list and take care of whatever we can take care of. We think we're running our lives, you know, we have a fantasy that we can live forever. We've, you know, like there are all kinds of ways in which we imagine that we're the pilot of our experience, but we're actually constantly then being buffeted by real life happening, right? Pandemic unfolds, you know, car gets a flat tire, just all kinds of ways in which our illusions about being the pilot of our experience are being, you know, sort of shattered. So I'm thinking about this a little bit differently, which is not so much I'm in charge of my life and I can do what I want. It's not that. It's more like we think things keep happening to us and we're just trying to kind of deal with them as they're happening, rather than thinking about the quality of experiencing, which is a different thing from a to-do list, right? Just the quality of experiencing we're establishing for ourselves. So in practice, we're establishing a certain quality of experience that comes out of stillness and silence, and that enables us to meet what is arising as a kind of self-actualizing system. So that's quite different from our normal way of trying to manipulate our experience. We're trying to manipulate it at the external level, arrange things at the external level so they're comfortable for us internally, but that's not how it works. Life doesn't work like that. So to be the pilot of one's own experience is like Maria was talking about when someone else is angry, you can get caught up in that then, right? And then you're kind of in in the world of anger. Like that's what you're in, that universe, right? Or being the pilot of your own experience, you can choose not to get caught in that undertow, right? And to stay present in a different way than probably our conditioning has taught us to do or shaped us to do. And this is truly a radical act. When we're not bound by our conditioning, we're free. And when we're free, we can direct our awareness and our activity and our energies in ways that come straight out of the source in us, the creative energy, the creative intelligence of the universe, as Longchenpa puts it. That's entirely different, but you do have to be a pilot of that energy, right? So that it's manifesting itself in accord, in alignment with your aspiration. So that's quite different than our egoic sense of I've got a lot to do, I've got to get this done, I have to make something of myself, I have to, you know, like make good use of this life because life is short, you know, all of the ways in which we get ourselves going that are basically egoic or self-making. Sometimes I think of it more as self-oriented rather than egoic, because egoic people often sort of experience connotations of selfishness in that. It doesn't mean that. It just means oriented towards the self or engaged in the work of building a self. And that's not necessarily some phony persona or something that we're trying to put up to fool other people. It's just how we feel ourselves becoming a person and what we hold as who we are. Does that make sense? Yeah. So sometimes I'll just call it being self-oriented. Sometimes our awareness is other-oriented. Sometimes it's self-oriented. And our issue is really more how it gets stuck. It gets stuck on the self and can't consider the other, or it gets stuck on the other and can't take care of the self. So the fixations are what cause the problem, not the fact that we're attending to one thing or the other, or our awareness is on one thing or the other. So when it's free to move, we can recognize I need some self-care, I need some time down, or I need to be connected with other people right now. I'm feeling a little lost and lonely. So, so then our awareness is free to move internally and externally. So, but until we start labeling our thoughts and our feelings and our sensations, we are not really aware of that capacity of awareness. And so from that standpoint, we're sort of jerked around either by external events or by our internal conditioning or by some connection between the two. So we don't want to be jerked around, and we don't want to be prisoners of our conditioning, which has served us well up to a certain point, but certainly also confines us and constrains us in ways that prevent us from realizing our full potential and capacities. Joel?
First thank you. I'd like to make an observation, which is that one of the first things I learned from you, and that I heard in the story of your early meeting with Joko, was that telling a story about how you are a failure is self-directed. It's not by the usual sense egoic, since you're trying to own up to your own failings, but it is self directed in a way that gets very, very, very sticky, at least for me, and can be, like it's my number one false refuge, I would say. That's where I go to. But the question that I had is, it seems like Joko's thought labeling process, from what I've read in her work and in the penumbra of people around her, is exactly about breaking the enchantment of conditioning so that you can recognize, oh, this is not me, this is a story that I'm telling myself, etc. And I have some freedom here. That seems to come directly from Joko's technique. So I was very curious when you said that you didn't even recognize this until you heard it from Flint. What did Flint bring that was different?
I think a kind of adventurous capacity to create desirable or beautiful experiences. So in just labeling thoughts, you might not get that impression. It's just what's arising, what's arising, what's arising. And you realize that the thoughts are just thoughts. So there is some freedom in that, but that freedom doesn't necessarily mean you become the author of your own narrative, so to speak, that you recognize that you have the capacity actually to fundamentally create new kinds of experiences, that it's not just things that are happening to you. So, we would be somewhere and he would say, there's a little museum around the corner. Let's see what's in the little museum. Or, he always had a sense of discovery, right? Of new experiences that could be intentional. That wasn't just accidental, but actually was intentional. And that you could set an intention to have beautiful experiences, or you could set an intention to have meaningful experiences. That thought had never crossed my mind.
Okay. Thank you. That's a wonderful explanation. Yeah. And I have also seen this in Flint's teaching and in yours. And just to add on to what I started with, that the recognizing the story can, for someone like me, turn into another self-directed focus project, because as you were saying with Laurie, as you go on the path, new thoughts will arise that are confirming or disconfirming or something, but the focus is always in up in here. and doesn't allow for the possibility of joy in anything else.
Right.
Or you know, within the process, it's not a given factor, although it is a given factor in our lives. And to be able to recognize that is a great gift.
Yeah, yeah. So you definitely want to be also labeling feelings that are arising, emotion states that are arising, physical sensations that are arising, because often those things are associated. So we'll have a physical sensation and then some thoughts get attached to it. And then we're often running from there even. And it can go the other way around too. You know, you have a thought and it gives you a chill, right? So those relationships are discoverable when we have the capacity to observe, like an anthropologist might observe or a scientist might observe, oh, this arising, oh, this arising. And you begin to see the more subtle backstory of judging what's arising, right? And you realize how caught up we are in constantly observing from a particular stance, observing for what's wrong, of what I'm doing badly, what I never get right, what other people seem to be able to manage, but I always screw up, or, you know, like.
Right. And that can turn into an infinite chain.
Absolutely.
You know? Infinite.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Infinite regress, you know, and now I'm doing that again, you know, like now I'm judging.
I'm also connecting it with something that Laurie talks about quite a bit, and that is, it's a really good idea to go outside and enjoy the sky and the air and the trees and everything and the songs of the birds and everything that's around us.
Yeah.
And the hum of the city, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And you can actually, you know, sort of tweak yourself by saying, okay, this sunset is a 4. I've seen sunsets that were 8s, 9s even, but this is just a 4. You know, this tree, look how asymmetrical it is. This is bad, right? And you have to laugh at yourself, right? Because we're completely capable of doing that. But the truth is we're constantly doing it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Constantly judging things that don't need any judgment, including ourselves. So Maria.
Well, I was going to say that that's why we like nature, because it just is what it is. But now you've just proven that we can even manipulate that and do things with that. Because what I was going to say is I noticed that I've worked very closely with people with mania and psychosis, and how I have to keep myself centered so that you don't get carried away with their extremeness, their extreme anxiety, their immediacy, their need, their sense of urgency, where everything is so urgent. And I've noticed how my mum and sister, when one gets ill, we have to keep them apart, because if they're next to each other, one of them catches the mania. They literally catch the anxiety, the urgency. They can't find their own center in that, and they're very much sort of immersed in each other. So you have to keep them apart. And I think mania is a great example of how, like, I've worked in mental health hospitals with people with mania, and how keeping them apart when they're in that state of mania, because as soon as they get together, it's like a fire lighting in the other one, and the other one begins to experience the exact same thoughts, and they catch the urgency, and they don't have a way of, and that's extreme, but it's what we do on a different level, where we catch everybody else's energies and feelings and sense of urgency. We might not become manic or get into that state, but we're still on a level. You could even class it as a kind of neurosis or illness, can't you, where you're catching somebody else's feelings and thoughts. They're not your own, and yet they feel like your own, and you feel like it's your problem, it's your urgency. And we can struggle to really stay in our own center. And I was going to say, that's why we love nature, because it is, we go out into nature to get that calmness, because it is just what it is. But like you said, we can even judge that.
Oh, absolutely. You know, absolutely. And we're doing it continuously, sort of below the radar, you know. It's a little too windy today, you know, like yesterday was calmer. Yesterday was better because it was not so windy. And it's just, you know, like continuous, right? It's like everything is personal. Yeah. This is, and this is why practice is absolutely essential, so that we can see what we're up to, for one thing, and so that we aren't caught irretrievably in it. Okay, so labeling the thoughts, labeling the feelings, labeling sensations, a very instructive practice. But it is one that you have to do a little bit long term in order to start to recognize patterns and see systems of thought and the way that they operate. Not because they're wrong. That's not the point. Is not to say all, you know, these systems are wrong. The point is to recognize the ways that they can be a source of suffering for yourself and for others, and to be free. Not to be free without them, to be free right in the midst of them. So that it's not that we're struggling to not have certain thoughts, but that we recognize, oh, that's a thought. You know, I could kill her. That's a thought. You know, it's not a murder intent. It's a thought. And so to be able to distinguish that's very important. All right. Another, of course, form of very comprehensive concentration practice is found in the Buddha's original teachings in the Satipatthana and Anapanasati suttas. We've taught about these many times, but this is a training curriculum directly from the Buddha. So that's what makes it useful. The two are very similar in some ways, but the Satipatthana is more elaborated. It has much more emphasis on meditating on the repulsiveness of the body, stages of death and dying. So this was no doubt a wake-up call to young heedless monks, but Ananda became alarmed that the monks were mutilating themselves and even committing suicide. And he told the Buddha that the contemplations on death and repulsiveness of the body were kind of having a dire effect on the Sangha. So the Buddha was alarmed. He immediately gave a Dharma talk teaching that meditation should be conducive to happiness and joy, not harm. But then I think he must have realized the curriculum needed revision, and that's how we received the Anapanasati Sutta teaching. So it is a practice, a rich and powerful teaching that begins with simple breathing and ultimately leads to full awakening. So I'm gonna, this sutra is more rich and complex than the sort of condensed summary version we've taught. I'm going to give you a little bit of a sense of that here. I think I can call it up and share it with you so you get a little bit of a sense of it. Hold on here. I want to make sure that I don't give you the wrong thing. Okay. Here we go. See if you can see this now. Okay, I just have to get rid of the. I have to get rid of the extra things we don't need. All right, there we go. Now I think I can share this. This translation, I'm going to put this in the handout, so you don't need to worry too much about it, but just to show you how. Yeah, okay. Can you see this as Anapanasati Sutta, mindfulness of breathing? Everybody can see this? This is the stories of, in these original Pali Canon suttas often begin, thus I have heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi in the eastern monastery, the palace of Megara's mother, together with many well-known elder disciples. So then there's a guest list, some of the elder disciples, and the elder monks were teaching and instructing the younger monks or newer monks. Some were teaching 10 monks, some were teaching 20 monks. And so they were all discerning grand successive distinctions. So the Buddha was seated in the open air. He's surrounded by the Sangha of monks. They've all had their midday meal, and the Buddha would open things up, and he decides he's going to address them. So oftentimes these sutras begin with a question from a disciple, but he's just offering this teaching, which is this new curriculum, the revised curriculum of the Anapanasati Sutta. And he's encouraging them. He says, I'm content with this practice. I'm content at heart with this practice. So arouse even more intense persistence for the attaining of the as yet unattained, the reaching of the as yet unreached, the realization of the as yet unrealized. I will remain right here at Savatthi for another month through the water lily month, the 4th month of the rains. So in other words, you'll have a chance to ask questions later. And so they were very happy, and they became more persistent in their efforts. And then he said, on the next occasion, this assembly is free from idle chatter, devoid of idle chatter, and is established on pure heartwood, such as the Sangha of monks, such as this assembly, the sort of assembly that is deserving of gifts, deserving of hospitality, deserving of offerings, deserving of respect, an incomparable field of merit for the world, such as this Sangha of monks, such is this assembly. And so he goes on to say, in the Sangha, there are monks who are arhants, there are monks who are due to arise spontaneously in the pure abodes, and the qualities of all of these marvelous monks who are patiently practicing together. In this Sangha of monks, there are monks who remain devoted to mindfulness of in and out breathing. So he says, mindfulness of in and out breathing, when developed and pursued, is of great fruit, of great benefit. Mindfulness of in and out breathing, when developed and pursued, brings the 4 establishings of mindfulness to their culmination. The 4 establishings of mindfulness, when developed and pursued, bring the 7 factors for awakening to their culmination. The 7 factors for awakening, when developed and pursued, bring clear knowledge and release to their culmination. So then he teaches the mindfulness of in and out breathing, and you can see this is what we have summarized in our short form. But then he talks about the 4 establishings of mindfulness, and using the breath to establish these 4 foundations of mindfulness. Then he talks about the 7 factors for awakening and how to use breathing to establish, and mindfulness to establish these 7 factors for awakening. And then he talks about clear knowing and release, which is the ultimate. How are the 7 factors for awakening developed and pursued so as to bring clear knowing and release to their culmination? There is the case where a monk develops mindfulness as a factor of awakening, dependent on seclusion, dependent on dispassion, dependent on cessation, resulting in relinquishment. He develops analysis of qualities as a factor to awakening. So he lists all the 7 factors and shows how ultimately it results in relinquishment, meaning just releasing everything. And this is what the Blessed One said. So this is and there's some notes here. This translation is by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, a much revered teacher in the Theravadan tradition. So the preliminaries are, how is mindfulness of in and out breathing developed and pursued so as to be of great fruit, of great benefit? There is a case where a monk, having gone to the wilderness, to the shade of a tree, or to an empty building, sits down, folding his legs crosswise, holding his body erect. So you need a place where you won't be bothered, basically, is what the Buddha is saying. Place in nature is great. But if you can find a space, a room or a space where you won't be bothered and distracted, that's conducive to this practice. And establishing mindfulness to the fore. So this is interesting because the note says, it's been translated, that's been understood as the tip of the nose or the sign of the mouth. But the term appears as kind of a stock phrase describing a person engaged in meditation, even for themes that have nothing to do with the body at all. So it's likely that it's used in an idiomatic sense, that mindfulness is placed face to face with this object, or that it's made prominent, which is how he translated it, Thanissaro. So always mindful, he breathes in, mindfully breathes out. Breathing in long, he discerns I'm breathing in long, or breathing out long, he discerns I'm breathing out long. So this is the beginning. It's just establishing mindfulness of the breathing, and then he begins the training. Breathing in short, he discerns I'm breathing in short. Then he trains himself. This is the training. I will breathe in sensitive to the entire body. He trains himself. I will breathe out sensitive to the entire body. He trains himself, I will breathe in calming bodily fabrication. He trains himself, I will breathe out calming bodily fabrication. That is all of the bodily activity and sensations and so on. So it goes on, and so this is the full sutra, Anapanasati Sutta. So I'll put this up, and you can read the full sutta. What we've done is created a kind of guide that is a sort of summary of the sutra. It doesn't go into the 7 factors of mindfulness. It's really just intended to be a base for regular everyday practice. So I'm going to share this with you. Some of you have seen this before, so let me share this with you. Okay. So it's divided into 4 main parts: body, feeling, mind, and dharmas. So it begins with the breath. And this is preliminary to training. And sometimes in the Buddha's teachings, he'll say, and setting aside grief and longing for the world. You begin your practice by setting aside grief and longing for the world. So you're breathing in long, one understands, I breathe in long. Breathing out long, one understands, I breathe out long. So when Analayo teaches this, which I think is great, these are not separate practices that you do it separate. You do the whole comprehensive set of these in one practice. And I usually devote 3 breaths to each step. And so it begins with long breaths, which you take intentionally. I breathe in long. You breathe 3 deep breaths is basically what we're doing at the beginning. Then it says breathing in short. All that means is you're returning to natural breathing, not taking these deep, deep, long breaths. You're just going to return to natural breathing. Breathing in short, one understands, I breathe in short. Breathing out short, one understands, I breathe out short. One trains. Now we're beginning training. One trains. Experiencing the whole body, I shall breathe in. One trains. Experiencing the whole body, I shall breathe out. I find that 3 breaths is necessary just to get oriented to that, right? And the first one is just like a transition into that. And then the middle one is sort of getting myself established. And the third one is actually experiencing it. One trains. Calming bodily activity, I shall breathe in. One trains. Calming bodily activity, I shall breathe out. So I think of this like the mother placing her hand on the restless child who's in bed, settling down. And this calming is just this calming effect of this warm connection. So then you continue 3 more breaths. You're going to continue. One trains, experiencing joy, I shall breathe in. One trains, experiencing joy, I shall breathe out. Now, I should point out here that there are times when it's very difficult for me to summon up the experiencing of joy. And other people may experience that also. It's perfectly fine to stay in that place and to continue breathing in and breathing out as you access either some joy in the past or some joy you anticipate in the future, or just what is that experience, really, that effervescent feeling of joy. So maybe you have to go back to childhood, to when you're running around in the grass or something, to recall the experience of joy. But that's what we're trying to do, is access that. The Buddha is very clear that meditation should be conducive to joy, and that joy is a factor in awakening. So this is just a little practice intended to connect us with that joy. And so if I need to, I'll just stay there as many breaths as until I access that sort of effervescent, free, liberated feeling of joy. And sometimes it comes from the form of my little granddaughter, and sometimes it comes in the form of my little dog, and sometimes it's just arising by itself spontaneously. Because there's great joy in practice. Here we are, we're practicing. So then one trains experiencing happiness, I shall breathe in. One trains experiencing happiness, I shall breathe out. And happiness is a kind of a widening of joy into this kind of ease, and it's not quite so effervescent, it's more sort of even, and it's just general happiness. Here we are, we're alive, we're breathing, we should be happy, right? So then one trains experiencing mental activity, because almost immediately your mind starts kicking in, right? Am I doing this right? I'm not really sure, am I experiencing happiness? Am I not experiencing happiness? I don't know, So experiencing mental activity, I shall breathe in. One trains experiencing mental activity, I shall breathe out. If you are not experiencing mental activity, perhaps you're dead. You should check and make sure. One trains calming mental activity, I shall breathe in. One trains calming mental activity, I shall breathe out. And it's just this sense of calm. And that allows us to drop below the level of mental activity to experience the mind. Experiencing the mind, I shall breathe in. One trains experiencing the mind, I shall breathe out. And I love this, that every refrain begins with one trains. We're in training, we're training ourselves. Experiencing the mind, I shall breathe out. So we're accessing the mind under all the thinking, all the waves of thought, this deeper mind. And one trains gladdening the mind, I shall breathe in. One trains gladdening the mind, I shall breathe out. So we're illuminating the mind with gladness. One trains concentrating the mind, I shall breathe in. One trains concentrating the mind, I shall breathe out. And that concentration is not bringing things into a focus like that. It's a wholeness, so that the mind is whole and not bits and pieces of it scattered all over the place. It's brought into wholeness. Concentrating the mind, I shall breathe out. One trains liberating the mind, I shall breathe in. One trains liberating the mind, I shall breathe out. At this point, there's a turn. And the turn is from this activity to a contemplation. So we have accessed the mind, we've settled the body, we've experienced gladness, and we've settled mental activity. We've experienced the mind, gladdened the mind, concentrated the mind, and liberated the mind so that it can be turned towards this contemplation. This is not a state to achieve just for its own sake. It is actually so that we can turn it toward investigation of the dharmas. So the four that are mentioned here are only some of the dharmas that could be a source of contemplation, but one trains contemplating impermanence, I shall breathe in. One trains contemplating impermanence, I shall breathe out. And I should point out that impermanence is not just the going away of things, it's also the arising of things, right? And the constant flow of that arising, sustaining, and disappearing. So contemplating impermanence, I shall breathe in. And then having that contemplation, then one turns to contemplating dispassion, I shall breathe in. One trains contemplating dispassion, I shall breathe out. So dispassion is freedom from the binding forces of emotions. It's not some sort of stoicism, or it's not uncaring. It's freedom from afflictive emotions specifically. Contemplating dispassion, I shall breathe out. So it's not intended to turn you into some sort of a stump, but this openness that is not caught. Then contemplating cessation, I say the cessation of suffering, I shall breathe in. One trains contemplating cessation, I shall breathe out. And then one shifts to contemplating letting go, I shall breathe in. One trains contemplating letting go, I shall breathe out. So this whole last set of 4 contemplations is encapsulated in the last mantra in the Heart Sutra, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhisvaha, which, as Flint points out, Cobancino taught, actually means falling apart, falling apart, falling completely apart. And I think that's a very lovely way to think about it, because it's sometimes taught as going beyond, and which seems like some heroic endeavor, but it's everything is impermanent. Everything, everything is actually free of our emotion states and thoughts about it. And everything ultimately ceases, everything that arises. And I can let go of all of that. So there's some little condensed verses at the end. Breathing in, the body relaxes. Breathing out, the body is free. Breathing in, the heart opens. Breathing out, the heart is free. Breathing in, the mind quiets. Breathing out, the mind is free. Breathing in, I awaken. Breathing out, I am free. So this is the liberating verses. And I created these so that you would have something you could actually memorize and use in moments of stress or upset, because this will be very reorienting for you. Okay, does that make sense? And Naleo, it's often taught in separate things, like you're going to study the meditation on breathing for 6 months, and that's as far as you're going to go. In many practices, they've broken up all of these teachings, but Analayo argues that they should be done as a coherent whole every time. And I find that if I do 3 breaths for each of these, it ultimately takes about 15 minutes. It drops you into a very still, quiet place. So if you're doing a half-hour meditation, you're now going to have about 15 minutes of real quiet. And that's what we are preparing the mind for, is that. So this is often taught as a preliminary to open awareness in training programs. It's really about quieting the mind and making the mind malleable and bright and lucid and aware. So how is this practice and training relational, since you're basically focusing, contemplating, training, So the way I think about it is, let's imagine you had this clear, bright, lucid, and concentrated mind when you're relating with yourself or with another person or with a group or with the world. How do you think that might affect the process of relating? The training is not so that you can experience some exalted state, but so that you can use this lucid, clear awareness to investigate the Dharma and be alive in your present situation and the world, and for the people in your life, which is more what we'll explore next week, is investigation of the Dharmas. So does that make sense to people? And I'm gonna stop this share and see if you have any questions about any of this so far. Oops, hold on here. I just did something wrong.
I think Kim had his hand up first, and then Richie.
Okay,
and then
Kim, and then Richie, and then Lori. Okay, Kim.
Well, just the connection that I see to the relational part is that imagining that we don't have any boundaries.
Right.
That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting to realize that you are breathing with all living beings, together with all living beings, breathing in and breathing out. Plants, animals, all living beings are breathing.
Not as a fixed entity.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. There's
just the one breath, and we're sharing it. Yeah. So, Richie?
Bit about the Dharma categories. I think I've asked you this before, and it's just when we're in that stage, are we thinking about impermanence, thinking about dispassion, cessation, renunciation, or are we? You said that it can be a place where we're not thinking when you contemplate.
It's just contemplation. So, and what you realize is, we're just calming the mental activity. We're not stopping any mental activity. So our minds are going to continue to, I think, address or meet this question of impermanence. But even the thinking is impermanent, right? The thoughts are impermanent. So they become just woven into the fabric of this contemplation of all of our human experience is impermanent, and everything that we know is impermanent. Yeah. So it's not to try and stop that, but not to get caught up in it, but to realize that in an embodied way and a heartfelt way too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Okay. Lori?
I somehow missed that.
Missed what?
Where they are, the handouts. Where do we find them?
They'll be on the page, on the class page.
Okay, and that is located
on the website. If you click on teachings,
okay,
then you'll see a list, a link, Foundations of Zen. This is in the series. This is in that Foundations of Zen 13. It's the last one.
Okay.
And then that'll take you to the web page, which has tons of resources, all of the video and audio links, all of the handouts for all the classes, all my class notes, everything's on that web page.
Oh, great. I didn't know about that page.
Yeah.
I missed that. Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Joel, did you have something? You had your hand raised there for a second.
That we are breathing with, thank you, Maria, to the point that we are breathing with all beings. Just that I've experienced multiple times in a way that seemed kind of freeing for me that I'm not doing the breathing. It's a natural process that's arising that I share, I share with all beings, and that the breathing is creating me, not the other way around.
Yeah. It's very interesting to me that we have this practice of awareness of breathing at a time when there's a global pandemic, which is afflicting people's breathing. And sometimes I think about how fortunate it is to be able to breathe with such ease when you're well, right? And we don't even think about that. We don't even think, this is a gift to have ease in our breathing. Mm-hmm. So, it has really been striking me how remarkable it is that this pandemic is a pandemic that's respiratory.
I had childhood asthma and was hospitalized many times. So the awareness of difficulty in breathing has been with me for as long as I can remember.
Yeah. And sometimes when people practice this awareness of breathing, they become caught in this kind of a struggle. And a lot of thoughts and associations get attached to it, and they worry about it, and they have difficulty with this practice. So this is not an assignment. It's really more like Now you understand this practice a little bit. As you practice it, you'll learn more about it. And it's another resource for you. It's not required. It's just another resource in your practice path. It may be that for a time you have to practice mindfulness and walking, or concentration on a pebble or a flower. The reason I wanted to teach this class is so that people would understand each of these practices well enough to know when, for their own benefit, they might take up a particular practice. It's always most helpful to work with a teacher. And if you have a question about a certain practice, do you think it'd be useful for me to work with, concentration practices or metta practices? By all means, if you have access to a teacher, check that out. But if you're on your own, you may find yourself in a hotel room or, in the middle of a debate with a family member, and you have these resources to draw on as a way to center yourself and be grounded and present in the way that you hope to be. So the idea is really not so that you have a bunch of tricks up your sleeve, so much as in relationship with this situation I'm in right now, is there something I can draw on that will support me and nourish me in sustaining my aspiration, basically. So okay. Any other questions about any of that? Okay. Another form of concentration that comes from our Soto practice, not so much from the Theravadan side of things, is one of the practices that we use is koans. So I want to give you a very brief introduction today to koan practice, and then we'll dive in a little bit more next week with that practice. Let's see, hold on here. When we get into investigation of dharmas. So in Soto Zen, koans are stories, teachings that are intended not for this kind of very focused concentration that we've been looking at, so much as kind of awareness we can return to. So I think the best thing to do is to give you a little bit of a taste of how koans have been introduced in a couple of very important texts that we like to use. The first one is the Book of Serenity, which is the classic collection of koans that's used in Soto Zen. And the translation we use is by Thomas Cleary. So in the introduction, he says, the Book of Serenity is a classic text of Chan Zen Buddhism, a vehicle of ancient knowledge said to go back to time immemorial and to have been originally transmitted from mind to mind. The continuity of Zen transmission was fostered by periodic revisions and renewals in a body of special techniques and the knowledge subtending them. Many of these techniques are encoded in the Book of Serenity, and the use of this kind of literature to help elicit certain perceptions is itself one of these techniques. So the language is itself part of the technique. The branch of ancient tradition that came to be known as Zen is customarily traced back in Chinese history to the late 5th and early 6th centuries, and was approaching the end of its third overt major phase in China when the Book of Serenity was compiled. So in the Book of the Serenity, which some of you have already worked with a little bit, each koan has a kind of a format, a structure. There's an introduction by one song, generally alluding to particular perspectives, frames of mind, patterns of thought and action. Then there's the case, what's called the case. And koan or gong'an in Chinese really means a public case. It would be like some authority would post some policy publicly, and that would be a public case. So the case from Chan lore or Buddhist scripture, a saying or anecdote illustrating some aspect or aspects of Chan awareness and practice. Then a commentary by Wansong expounding upon the case. These commentaries are often even more confusing and baffling than the case itself. And then a verse by Tiantong reflecting the pattern of the case in poetic form, also often baffling and perplexing. And then a commentary by Wansong on the verse, also baffling and perplexing. So, but that's the basic structure. I was very taken with Guo Gu's book, Passing Through the Gateless Barrier, because as a Chinese teacher, Chan teacher, he has insight into the context of some of these koans that really help clarify them. They're not intentionally baffling, but there are some aspects of Chinese culture that are woven into them that are not apparent to us. And he's really good at unpacking that. So in the Chinese tradition, Gong'an is the term that later became koan in Japanese. And so Guo Gu says, Gong'an collections are more than just books. As a method of spiritual cultivation, Gong'ans are unique in the whole of Buddhism, in all the history of human development for that matter. There's really nothing like them. Before I explain how to use Gong'an as methods of practice, it's important to keep in mind that they come from everyday life situations and are meant to be engaged with. Thus, Gong'ans cannot be studied or learned or analyzed. Gong'ans cannot be studied or learned or analyzed. Discursive explanations of and intellectual speculations about life are not life. None of the Gong'ans tell you what life is. They only put a spotlight on different aspects of life. The purpose is to show that all situations in life, its ups and downs, are opportunities to awaken to your true nature. To many people, they seem absurd, upside down. This is because many people live their lives in an upside down way, bound by their own rational thinking, concepts, and proliferation of notions about the world, which they take as the world. Thus, Gong'ans turn us right side up and free us from our own bondage. To engage in Gong'an practice, then, is to use the cases as a method to investigate your own life and what it means to live according to your true nature. This engagement is called investigating Chan. Investigation here does not mean thinking. Thinking is always dualistic and discriminatory and has the tendency to reify things as real and unchanging. Ordinary people's thinking is a form of self-grasping. Thinking is by nature self-referential. Because it is self-referential and filtered through words and language, it also reifies whatever people experience as out there, real, and separate. Being diluted by the thinking process, a sense of self and other come into being, and people are forever alienated from their experience. This is not to say that thoughts themselves are the problem. The problem is the tendency to take the concept of a thing to be the thing itself. Because of this delusion, attachment arises and suffering follows. To investigate Chan is to use poison against poison, to use a Gong'an as a springboard to realize that which lies before words, language, and concepts arise, your true nature, which can never be defined or reified or grasped. Therefore, whatever concept you come up with about a Gong'an is just another concept. It is not freedom. Gong'ans are not puzzles or problems to be solved. There's nothing to solve. The stories in Gong'ans defy logic and force the discriminating, logical mind to become stuck, turning words, language, and concepts on their head, and thereby shattering self-grasping so practitioners can wake up to who they truly are. So the point is not to solve them. Use the Gong'an to dissolve your self-referentiality or any fixation. So they're kind of a pry bar, right? And so I know we're coming to the end of our time, and I'm going to leave you with this one koan. I'll read it to you, just to play with over this next week in that way. And it's called Dizhong planting the fields. I've taught on this koan before, and I like it because I think it feels accessible at first, and then it starts really working on you. So the introduction, scholars plow with the pen, orators plow with the tongue. We patch-robed mendicants lazily watch a white ox on open ground, not paying attention to the rootless, auspicious grass. How to pass the days. The case. Dizhong asked Shushan, where do you come from? Shushan said, from the south. Dizhong said, how is Buddhism in the south these days? Shushan said, there's extensive discussion. Dizhong said, how can that compare to me here planting the fields and making rice to eat? Shushan said, what can you do about the world? Dizhong said, what do you call the world? So there's some notes there, the reference to the white ox, which might be baffling, a little bit baffling. So there's some notes about that, that image. So I'm going to put this on the website, on the handouts for class 4. And I hope you have a wonderful week playing with this koan. Our practice of Zen is like a serious play. And so that kind of play that is life-affirming, and yet it's also joyful and engaging, but doesn't have any outcome, purpose, or a kind of product as a result. So it's like kids playing, serious play. All right. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time.